The colonization of the Americas had four main players: Spain, Portugal, France, and England. But they weren't the only ones. You also had the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Russia. But even aside all of those, believe it or not, there were a few short-lived German colonies in the Americas. They weren't colonies of Germany, because Germany wouldn't be a unified country until 1871, but they were colonies of individual German states. Because these nations were minor, their colonies usually didn't end up having the same financial backing and guaranteed flow of resources that the bigger powers had. Nevertheless, I find it interesting to learn about short-lived moments in history, so in this video I'll go over each of the obscure colonies' history and why they ended up failing. The first German colony was by far the most significant, and that was Klein Venedig, or Little Venice. It didn't belong to a specific German state, but rather a banking family known as the Wessler family. While the Wessler family had significant influence in their home cities of Augsburg and Nuremberg, this colony was leased to them by the Spanish. They were granted the western Venezuelan coast in 1527 by Spain as a repayment for the large sums of money that the Wessler family had loaned out to the Spanish king and Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. The Wessler family was interested as, like many areas of the New World, there were rumors of large untapped gold mines somewhere. An El Dorado, perhaps. The main catch, though, was Spain didn't really have much of a colony there yet. The area was only Spanish under the Treaty of Tordesillas, so it hadn't been conquered and settled yet, aside from a few small coastal settlements. And even those were basically brand new, so the Wessler family would have to do the conquering and settling themselves. Or at the least, they'd have to hire people to do it. In 1528, they sent a hired fleet to the coast and found the only one-year-old settlement of Santa Ana de Coro and turned it into Neu-Augsburg with the purpose of being the capital. Naturally, expeditions were sent to find El Dorado or any sort of gold, and while they did find Lake Maracaibo and a bunch of angry indigenous tribes, they didn't find any gold or really anything else that they'd be interested in. As a result of all these expeditions, many people hired by the Wessler family kept dying of disease. And over time, Spain became a bit weary of letting them continue their control of the region. In 1541, the governor of Little Venice, named Philip von Hutten, went on yet another expedition to find El Dorado, but was gone so long that rumors arose that he died on the expedition. Spain decided that they had enough, and they placed a man named Juan de Carvajal as their own governor of Venezuela. But then awkwardly in 1546, von Hutten's expedition returned. Carvajal did not wish to relinquish his power, however, and refused to let the real governor return to his position. After a brief clash, von Hutten and his men were eventually captured and executed later that year, ending the colony for good and returning Venezuela to full Spanish control. You know the Teutonic Order, those German knights that ruled most of the Baltic in late medieval times? Well, by the 17th century, they didn't really have any Baltic lands anymore. However, one leftover consequence was there was a German-speaking duchy in modern-day Latvia called the Duchy of Courland and Semigalia. While Courland was a vassal of Poland, they did try their own colonization of the Americas nonetheless. In the early 17th century, Spain in theory controlled the entire Caribbean, but as more European nations became interested, it was just too difficult to keep control of every Caribbean island. So this is when you have the English, French, Dutch, and Danes starting to take control of various small Caribbean islands. Courland set its sights on the island of Tobago in 1637, but they failed. Then in 1639, they tried again, and they failed. But finally, in 1642, they did set up a settlement on Tobago that was blockaded by Spain, and the indigenous population didn't like them either, so by 1650, they abandoned the attempt. Courland refused to give up, though, and they tried yet again in 1654, this time settling again and giving the island the name of New Courland. But then the Second Northern War breaks out in Europe, and the Duke of Courland, Jacob Kettler, ends up getting captured by Sweden. Not wanting the colony to fall into Swedish hands, the Dutch decided to seize New Courland in 1659. The Treaty of Oliwa in 1660 returned the colony, but it was a very chaotic time for the island, as at different times there would be brief invasions or occupations by pirates, the Spanish, the French, the English, the Dutch again, and even indigenous Arawakan forces. This led to Courland to just finally give up and sell the colony to England in 1689, officially ending the colony in 1690. The next German attempt at colonization was done by the Electorate of Brandenburg, which was in a personal union with the Duchy of Prussia. so it's kind of a Prussian colony, but technically under the Brandenburg side. Brandenburg had started investing in the transatlantic slave trade, which led to them establishing a few colonies in Africa off of modern-day Mauritania and Ghana. Naturally, wanting a colony on the other side of the Atlantic, they managed to make a deal with the Danes and lease a part of the island of St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands in 1685. So yeah, it's barely a colony so far. But in 1689, Brandenburg Prussia managed to take control of Vieques Island off of Puerto Rico, naming it Krabeninsel, or Crab Island. However, in 1693, they decided to return to Spain after finding the island indefensible and also a diplomatic liability, which, I mean, you just took it from Spain, why are you surprised? That same year, though, the Danes seized the land in St. Thomas back, leaving only a colonial factory under Brandenburg's control. In the early 1700s, Brandenburg would also lose its African colonies, making their factory in St. Thomas further irrelevant to their interests, and the entire enterprise ended in 1754. This last one is a special case because this planned German colony never ended up quite happening. In 1669, the County of Hanau in the Holy Roman Empire was interested in a colony to try and help its economy and its trade balance. So they made a deal with the Dutch West India Company to be leased a large territory claimed but not really controlled by Dutch Guiana in South America. Had this gone through, this would have been about as big as Little Venice a century before. However, they could not find enough people willing to try it, but they had already signed the deal, so they desperately tried to sell the lease to King Charles II of England and Scotland. However, he didn't buy it. So the County of Hanau ironically entered even worse financial trouble than they already were. So, aside from Little Venice, these colonies weren't exactly anything of major size or success, and part of it had to do with how expensive colonizing was. You needed to get a lot of resources and money to set the thing up, and to get the people there, and the payoff had to be worth it to convince hundreds of people to move across the Atlantic and set up an entire new life there. So naturally, the bigger nations were just going to have a better chance at a lasting colonial enterprise. So while these colonial failures are not surprising, learning about them is still pretty interesting. I'm Emperor Tiger Star, and I'll see you guys next time. If you like this video and you want to see more, you can support the channel by becoming either a Patreon supporter or a channel member. You get to see videos early and some exclusive behind the scenes stuff. Every little bit helps keep the channel going, so it really means a lot. Thank you.